Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 27th of January 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure by live Skype link. And really, well, a Friday at the end of quite an incredible week, Mike. We've seen all sorts of things unfolding. And we have to say that we believe our exclusive about Britain's nuclear deterrent being passed to the French has caused quite some eruptions in the background. But there's even more piling through, and I believe we start with
Trump. David, this is the National. You wanted to highlight this. TikTok, President Trump means the world is one step closer to Doomsday. Who decides where we are with regard to Doomsday, the Doomsday clock?
A very highly trained group of politically motivated cretins, Mike.
Okay. And so what are they saying here?
Well, it's completely arbitrary. It means nothing. It's simply their view of Trump and of the world in political metaphor language. And as such, it's not very helpful because it dissuades people from looking at the real truth, the actually forming a proper assessment of Trump, what's good about him, what's bad about him, what's really dangerous. And it also asks people to turn off to all the dangers from the left, because we can be assured if Hillary Clinton had won the election and was busy organising action in the Ukraine and potentially starting World War III with Russia, that doomsday clock would have gone safely backwards or stayed where it was. They would not have been making this sort of claim.
Indeed. But when we visit Donald Trump, we've got to use a certain type of spoon.
Well, this is the very moderate view of the Guardian here. Use a long spoon. So this refers to if you're going to sup with the devil, be sure to use a long spoon. So in the view of the Guardian, Trump is Satan, so that's a very moderate view from the Guardian there.
And yet they have a very satanic-looking image of Theresa May there.
yes, there's a lot of those in the doing the rounds, of course. But yes, the picture editor did a good job here in backing up the extreme nature of the headline they gave this.
Yeah, okay, but you know, the wall is being built, and the BBC particularly unhappy that Donald Trump seems to be meeting many of his obligations that he said he would almost within the first week.
He's had quite a busy first week. I mean, people have been saying, well, what did all the other presidents do with their time? Because people can't remember it ever as much being done. Whether you love it or whether you hate it or whether you have mixed views, it's certainly not been dull. And he has made a lot of things move right from the get-go. So yes, he's hit the ground running.
David, just on that image, I was fascinated. Does that mean that Trump has actually banned McDonald's and pushed that over the border into Mexico as well? Because if he has, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start voting for him.
I don't know where what his policy is on fast food. I suspect, though, he might be for it.
Yes, okay, well, look, let's move on to Theresa May, because, of course, she is mentioned in that last headline and is visiting the United States at the moment, the first Western leader, apparently, to go and visit Donald Trump. She gave a big speech to the Congress yesterday. We'll just pick a few pieces out of this and see what it says. She began by saying how wonderful it was to be there and whatnot, but she said the United Nations, in need of reform but still vital, has its foundations in the special relationship from the original Declaration of St. James Palace to the declaration by the United Nations signed in Washington and drafted themselves by Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, born in the post-war world at Bretton Woods, was conceived by our two nations working together. And NATO, the cornerstone of the West defence, was established on the bonds of trust and mutual interest that exist between us. Some of these organisations are in need of reform and renewal to make them relevant to our needs today, but we should be proud of the role our two nations working in partnership played in bringing them into being and in bringing peace and prosperity to billions of people as a result. So it's my honour and privilege, blah, 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 blah. But she really was highlighting the need to renew the special relationship. And it was interesting that earlier in the week, Theresa May was saying that it was a special relationship that allowed her to criticize Donald Trump for comments that he had made during the week. And so I don't know whether either of you have any thoughts on what the exact nature of this special relationship is. David, any thoughts?
I certainly do. It was I was reading the very excellent book The Deluge, which is concerning the events of World War One, and covers and its main theme is the emergence of the United States as the hegemonic world power. And the relationship between the United States and the British Empire was very much that the United States was seeking to usurp the British Empire, to replace it, and to make itself the exceptional country, the number one country, and was claiming such things as the only area where moral virtue and moral credit, if you want to use the phrase, actually resided any more in the world. So it was very much an exceptionalist view. Now, at one point during the peace negotiations, when Woodrow Wilson wasn't getting his own way against the views of the British government, he actually, in a fit of rage, threatened to launch a war against Britain and wipe us off the face of the map. Now, not serious and not policy, but it does show that the nature of great American presidents, so-called great American presidents, might be a bit unreliable when it comes to how much we in Great Britain can rely upon their goodwill. When you get to FDR, he was quite explicit that he wanted to destroy the British Empire, and he was successful in doing so through the tumultuous times of the Second World War. So I think that we should be careful with the relationships with America, and always remember that their interests and our interests are not necessarily aligned. And the view that they should be has always been more of a British view than an American one. The American one is more a case of owner and pet.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I find this a very interesting question. I think my answer to it is that when Theresa May is talking about the special relationship between the UK and the USA, she's not actually talking about a special relationship between nation states. She's actually talking about the special relationship between the criminal cabal in the City of London and its proxy agents inside America. And I remember extremely well the moment when I was asked how the special relationship between the US and UK could be destroyed by Russia today. And I emphasised this point that this isn't politics between two countries forming the special relationship. This is the criminal elite, principally through the City of London. And if you want to destroy that relationship, then we need to tell the truth. So that's my take on it.
Okay, well, let's move on with what she said. She started talking about European Union and Brexit. She said, as we end our membership of the European Union, as the British people voted with determination and quiet resolve, she said, quiet resolve to do that, we have the opportunity to reassert our belief in a confident, sovereign and global Britain. But what she made absolutely clear is, for as long as we remain members of the EU, we will continue to play our full part, just as we will continue to cooperate on security, foreign policy and trade once we've left. And the thing is, David, that if you actually look at our relationship with the EU at the moment, since we're not involved with the EU on a monetary level, the only thing that's left is security, foreign policy and trade. So what she's effectively saying there is Brexit means Brexit, which means we stay in the EU because we'll continue to cooperate just as we always have done on security, foreign policy and trade.
Well, maybe what's missing here is the vision, the discussion for what Britain should be. There's no real analysis on what free trade is, for example. There's no real analysis on what it means for us as a country to be genuinely leading the world into an era of free trade, because it means much more than just coming out of the EU. It means having an internal organisation of our country that can compete, and we manifestly don't have that at the moment. So it's got an air of unreality for me at the moment.
Yes, but of course, your definition of free trade and her definition of free trade are two separate things.
Well, quite. I mean, free trade, as I'm defining it, is if you want to trade with someone, then you can. That is free trade. And this is a situation where if it's done voluntarily, both parties benefit because you have the advantages that come from the relative advantage of one part of the world producing one set of goods and another part of the world producing another set of goods. If you trade, you end up with more stuff. The entire world is enriched and both parties to trade can be enriched. Now, what we're talking about with Theresa May is very heavily regulated trade and rules-based trade. And the key there is who writes the rules and who influences and pays and bribes or threatens the people who write the rules.
Indeed. Okay, and then she spoke again about the special relationship. She said that we have to renew the special relationship for this new age because we're entering a new age. The world is passing through a period of change. In response to that change, we can either be passive bystanders or we can take the opportunity once more to lead and to lead together. She said the end of the Cold War did not give rise to a new world order. It did not herald the end of history. It did not lead to a new age of peace, prosperity, and predictability in world affairs. That we've got new enemies on the way. We've got the rise of Asian economies, China, and so on. But these events coming as they have at the same time as the financial crisis and its fallout, as well as the loss of confidence in the West following 9/11, and the difficult military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan have led many to fear in this century we will experience the eclipse of the West. But there's nothing inevitable about that, she said. And she said the days of, well, this was a really key point, the days of Britain and America intervening in sovereign countries in an attempt to remake the world in our own image are over. Now, that was a pretty definitive statement that she made. But unfortunately, some people believed that, or took her at her word and were quite excited by that comment. But unfortunately, Michael Fallon was speaking on Radio 4 this morning, and he said that, well, in saying that she was making clear that our continuing commitment to support the democracies in Afghanistan and Iraq, because there's a very real threat to our country from these transnational terrorist groups. And it's our own national interest that we do our best to help these democracies overcome the terrorism they face. But he said she is absolutely not ruling out future military intervention. On the contrary, we're increasing our effort both in Afghanistan and in Iraq because, as he said, there are terrorist groups there that threaten our country. So that's what he said. She is absolutely not ruling out the future military intervention.
He was obviously mistaken, Mike, clearly.
Or she was. I'm not clear which.
So the lies are catching them out, I think, David.
Yes, well, let's hope she sacks him, because that was undermining her leadership. So let's hope that he's reshuffled to sports minister with special responsibility for floods.
Well, I wonder whether she simply didn't know that he was youth minister for he was head of the European youth movement during the 1975. So he's totally pro-EU, masquerading as a Brexit man.
Yeah.
But maybe Theresa doesn't know. I noticed she's had a very interesting page boy haircut there in order to meet Trump.
Absolutely. So, yep.
I was only going to add to that, and I was intrigued with her pearl necklace because the big pearls are at the top, defying gravity.
Indeed. So let's see. She went on to say, to deal with the threats of the modern world, we need to rebuild confidence in institutions that we rely, and one of those is NATO, of course. And that's why she has already raised with Jens Stoltenberg the need to make sure the alliance, that's NATO, is equipped to fight terrorism and cyber warfare as it is to fight more conventional forms of war. So what she's talking about here, Brian, seems to be a changing role for NATO. She's saying that she needs to make sure that NATO is equipped to fight terrorism. But terrorism on a national level is done by the security services and also the civilian police. And so what I just wanted to remind everybody about was that in the European Defence Matters Conference, the European Defence Agency Conference, it was entitled European Defence Matters, in 2015, Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini were exactly talking about this, the merging of military and civilian policing. Federica Mogherini said we need to merge military and policing functions. And of course, we also reported recently that NATO are being issued non-lethal weapons, which implies that NATO is seeing for itself a role in civil unrest matters. And so this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this looks to me like a particularly dangerous development if she is raising with Jens Stoltenberg, and I'm quite sure he agrees with her, the need to make sure the alliance is equipped to fight terrorism and cyber warfare, because it is, we're not talking about wars across national borders here, we're talking about NATO deployed within nation states.
Yeah, just simply going into a nation state. This is very, very dangerous. And of course, the thing many people simply are not aware of is the speed at which the EU police, Europol, has been involved in the training of British police. Well, we've also had British police going to Israel for training for whatever reason. But so we've got the European Union very much in the background training police, and the European Union policy is paramilitary police. And we've got Theresa May, British Prime Minister, standing and utterly lying over a Brexit and moving away from European Union policy. David, it's almost getting difficult to comment on this because it is so obvious the extent of the lies and deceit.
Well, only a few days ago, Trump had said that NATO was obsolete. And I thought that was an extremely well-chosen word, because NATO was created to resist the threat, which was real, from the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, which had a philosophy of worldwide conquest and the means to do it. That threat has gone. The Russia of today is nothing like the Soviet Union of the 1960s and 70s. And obsolete seemed to be exactly the right word. And I'm unclear what its purpose is. And I'm also unclear as to what these new enemies are that Theresa May is talking about. I mean, excluding the ones we actually fund, who are the new enemies?
Well, excluding the ones that we fund, we don't have any new enemies. It's only the ones that we fund.
Yes, and this is the idea of perpetual war. This is war as peace. This is war as the life of the state. War as a political justification for suppression of liberty at home. This is very threatening. And what we need to be realizing is that there is a possibility of peace. We don't need to be viewing Russia, for goodness sake, as an enemy. And the degree of problems around the world that exist are a fraction of what they were through virtually all of the 20th century. And we seem to be being led by people who either can't see the opportunities, or are determined to create problems for their own reasons.
Okay, well, let's go move on with this, because she then went on to talk a little bit more about the fact that she's pursuing talks with President Trump and his new administration about a new UK-US free trade agreement in the coming months. Now, we should remember that when President Trump tore up TPP, he had this to say: we're going to stop the ridiculous trade deals that have taken jobs out of our country and taken companies out of our country. And I suppose there are many people who are maybe a little bit skeptical about what Trump is and what he represents, that are waiting to see what he's going to do. And to be honest, this issue of free trade, and we're talking here about the type of free trade that Theresa May is offering, which is not what David Scott is referring to. We wait to see what he does with this, because, of course, well, let's see what Michael Fallon had to say. He said that Britain and America share values in common. We have interests in common, ideas which we believe include, for example, supporting the international rules-based order by which the Western democracies deal with each other and trade with each other. And we think it extremely important that other countries, and he mentioned China specifically, abide by those rules as well. And that he believes that we're going to be working with the United States to de-escalate tensions in the South China Sea and to help to encourage China into the international system. So it's not just with the United States that we want to develop these free trade agreements. It's with, as we've mentioned many times, with all countries right around the world. And Brian, one of the key points here is we are, at least Theresa May is still pretty unhappy. Those that are behind the rules-based international order, shall we say, are unhappy about the BRICS and what the Chinese and the Russians are doing there with the Silk Road project and so on. And they absolutely want to try to draw them into this network of free trade agreements?
Well, it's the soft power, isn't it, Mike? Yeah, you slide to a country via the trade. You can control that trade. You control the banking. You control the aid, and ultimately you control the country, particularly with the help of media, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But significant that Theresa May said, "Well, we didn't achieve the New World Order then." As she's talking through, I'm thinking, yeah, we didn't achieve it then, but we're still headed towards it now. But we call it rules-based. We've changed the name.
Yes. Well, Michael Fallon, something else that he said this morning on the Radio 4 interview is that we have a really great deal with the United States with regard to defence procurement and defence industry, because we take out big contracts with huge US defence companies, and in return, we get some super little subcontracts from them.
Like maintenance of the F-35.
This is exactly it. So here's Harriet Baldwin here, and she has announced, she said in the week of the UK's industrial strategy, Minister for Defence Procurement, Harriet Baldwin, met with Boeing International President Mark Allen to mark the successes of a joint initiative to build UK prosperity and growth. This is the MOD and Boeing working together to build this UK prosperity, and they're doing that by a new commercial airline hangar to be constructed at Gatwick. That's going to be 100 jobs. Collaboration on a new £100 million P8A operational support and training base at RAF Lossiemouth. That's going to be 100 new jobs. They're facilitating a visit to Seattle for 37 UK suppliers to deepen relationships with Boeing. So that's good. They're training courses for UK suppliers on how to win additional business from Boeing. And there's going to be educational partnerships with the Royal Academy of Engineering. So far they've mentioned 200 jobs out of this. Yeah,
but they mentioned Boeing a lot. And of course, it'll be Boeing that takes over British aerospace. And that will be the end of our defence industry. Will then be totally dependent on the European procurement system, and the Americans will be torn between two masters. So there's big trouble coming here.
Absolutely. So with the quote here from Harriet Baldwin is, Britain's defence industry plays a key role in delivering an economy that works for everyone. And she said that Boeing expects to increase their UK workforce by 50% by 2020. Well, 50% is 600 jobs by the end of this Parliament. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and this is also the same lady that was simply unaware that we had major problems with our Type 45 destroyers. She thought, there was no trouble. There's going to be a contract to fix those engines. They're world-beating ships. They just can't work in warm water, but that's not a problem, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Theresa May's speech and related issues. But let's go back to Trump, David, because there's Jeffrey Tucker here asking, must we pick a side?
Yes, Jeffrey Tucker was the chap who controversially used the F word, the fascist word about Trump when Trump started his his run for the White House. And the reason he did this is he was seeing the living room, breathing space kind of philosophy that had characterized fascism in Europe and Germany being repeated with the trade barriers, building the wall, rhetoric from Trump, and he thought that was a risk. Now he's writing here and he's talking about how there are some things that Trump is doing which are pro-liberty and some things which are very concerning, and he's asking, do we need to pick a side? He's pointing out the lack of intellectual coherence and the very confused picture that's coming from the Trump administration, and he's saying that we should be keeping our ability to make judgments on the ethics and rightness of any policy without falling into the football club like fan zone for one political party or one political movement or another.
And related to that, you wanted to highlight your article, Nationhood versus Nationalism, on the website, on the UK Column website.
Yes, this explores some of these issues from a Scottish perspective in particular, and looks at the very divisive nature of nationalism in Scotland and compares it to the much more inclusive idea of nationhood, where you can have different views. What we're seeing from the nationalists and from the left as a whole is they will tolerate any sort of diversity apart from a diversity of ideas.
And you also wanted to highlight the Bionic Mosquito blog and an article here, Monarchy Without the King.
Yes, this is something that's well worth a look. If people could go and perhaps look this one out. It finishes with a reference to the changes in the Middle Ages. It says, everywhere men are leaving behind the liberty of the Middle Ages, not to enter into a modern brand of liberty, but to return to the ancient despotism. For centralisation is nothing else than an up-to-date version of the administration seen in the Roman Empire. And I think that's a very interesting point. And that's a quote from de Tocqueville. And it's a very interesting article.
Okay, a couple of announcements before we move on. The next UK column Highland Exposure meeting is... Northern Exposure, that should say.
It should say Northern Exposure,
yes.
It's okay. Yes, Sunday the 5th of February, 2 till 5, we are meeting in the Brayport Centre in Dunblane, the Cathedral View Room, and we hope to see lots of people there. We're going to have a number of speakers on the general subject of fighting for justice.
Okay, and I just want to mention that obviously earlier in the week we said that Ian Crane's Fracking Nightmare programme would be on last night. Unfortunately, their internet connection at the protest at Kirby Misperton let them down, and so they couldn't get the stuff up to us yesterday. So we were going to be showing that immediately after this programme. So if you want to watch, stay tuned.
Excellent. Right, well, moving on, we've talked about the militarisation of our police, but of course that's not all that's going on. And just like to give our viewers and listeners a heads up as to what's also going on in the police. And here in Devon and Cornwall, we've got Alison Hernandez, Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, this lady is a common purpose leader. Here she is. She's going to make Devon and Cornwall safer. But there's been a bit of a Twitter going on because one of the other candidates, unsuccessful candidates for her post, says that she's published the police plan ahead of its approval. More officers, but big cuts to PCSOs. And then he says, connecting with the community, ? I think not. So
those are police community support officers?
Yeah, police community support officers. But basically, she's published a plan which hasn't actually been through a meeting to be approved. And what's good about this is Gary Streeter, Conservative MP, greatly welcomes today's news and more police officers for our region. You note the EU definition there, region. Well done, Alison Hernandez. Great to see such positive leadership. Well, of course, we're talking here about common purpose leadership. So if we put it together, what's going on really? So we've got Alison on the right. We've got Gary Streeter with the glasses centre. She's saying, oh, Mr. Streeter, I've published the police plan for cuts to PCSOs ahead of the actual police preset meeting because as a common purpose leader, I can act outside authority. And we can say, well, she probably means a bit more. No, there's no proper investigation into my election expenses because as a common purpose leader, I can act outside authority. And what does it really matter that when paedophiles were found inside the common purpose networks, there was no police investigation? I mean, the whole point of common purpose is everyone can act outside authority. And of course, common purpose has trained Devon and Cornwall Police. So this is the reality of what's able to go on if you let common purpose get in to train your police force. But we've got big problems with the police, and we're going to ask David to give us an update on Brian and Janice Doherty. And we have to say this has been an extremely difficult case, not only because it has been so significant and so harrowing, but because we found it remarkably difficult to stay in contact with Brian and Janice themselves. And we've had a lot of people pushing for an update. So, David, can you give us, with an eye on the clock, can you give us a little bit of an update on where we think we are?
Well, Brian and Janice are still in Ireland. We've only heard from them once this month. Just after the new year, we'd sent them some funds across that had been donated by UK column listeners and viewers. And we got an acknowledgement and a thank you for that on the 5th of January, and we've not heard from them since. So they're still in Ireland and still, it would seem, very much alone. And the situation with the children is there has been a care order, we understand, granted by the High Court in Dublin, and the children are now formally in care of the Irish state. Now, in terms of the investigation, it's been very difficult because of the lack of communication, but we have made several areas of progress, notwithstanding that. Firstly, the key person in the sort of early part of the story was Mr. Alan Lowe, who was a neighbour of the Dohertys. And we very early found out that there was an Alan Lowe who was, in fact, a police officer, a DC Alan Lowe, in that vicinity. In fact, in the very police stations where the Dohertys had been interviewed and where the Viscount had been interviewed, these were the police stations in which Alan Lowe served. So we thought this was extremely suspicious. We then got a visual identification from the Dohertys that it was the same man. But we also got a complete and categorical denial of this from Police Scotland, that they said that the man who had been reported was not a police officer, had never been a police officer, and was most certainly not Alan Lowe. So that caused us some concern that whether we had the right man. But there was a key identifying feature that the Dohertys had stated, that the Alan Lowe that was their neighbour was missing several fingers from one hand, a very obvious and unique deformity. So we set about trying to find out whether the DC Alan Lowe did indeed have fingers missing from one hand. And a few weeks before Christmas, we found out from two sources that this was in fact the case. So there is now no doubt at all that the Alan Lowe, who was their neighbour and who approached them and offered them £25,000, saying, "I want access to the boy," was in fact a serving police officer, DC Alan Lowe. And what he was doing, we don't know. Why he was living as a builder or a gardener or something and not revealing his true identity, we don't know. We obviously can't even find out if it was some sort of police operation or undercover operation, because Police Scotland are not talking to us, and indeed are denying that it is the same man. But it seems clear that it was. So that's one area of significant progress.
Right, that is of course really significant, and I know that there's more work that's actually been done around the case, but we can't move forward on that without some input by Brian and Janice themselves. We're going to say to people that at the moment we're holding money that's been donated. As David said, well, I think you just said they've already had some, but the key issue is that we have to be certain that the money that's moved to them actually reaches them on the ground. And so it's been quite a complicated situation, but we're going to hold those donations once there is, we're back in good communication with Brian and Janice. We'll be able to move those funds on and also give you a further update. But what we deduce from what has happened is that the fear factor has been very, very powerful. The state has gone flat out to terrify this couple after taking their children. And of course, we know from other families that when children are taken, it's so easy for social services or the police or the state to be saying, if you don't keep quiet, you will never see those children again. So if you can imagine the sheer psychological pressure that these two have been under in saying we have found it difficult to be in communication, it's in no way a criticism. This is part of the harsh reality of these sorts of cases.
Just say, if you are new to the UK Column News and you aren't aware of the background to the Doherty case, get to the front page of the UK Column website. There's an icon on the right-hand side that's labelled Doherty Files. Do have a listen to the audio recordings that are there and read the articles, and you'll quickly catch up with what we're talking about.
Right. Thank you, Mike. So the undertone here, of course, is that the Police Scotland have far from doing their job with Brian and Janice Doherty. It's been Police Scotland themselves that have been part of the close down of the case and the harassment and the brutalisation of these two. But you've got another case here, David, concerning a young man, Sean Ritchie, who disappeared a little over 2 years ago, if I've got the dates correct. And a report here from the Evening Express: the hunt for Sean Ritchie goes on, say police. We've labelled this press spin, and we've got another one here: Daily Record: someone has murdered my son. Father of missing Fraserburgh man Sean Ritchie fears the worst. Now, we're not doubting what the father has said, but you have reason to say that these press reports are simply not accurate.
Well, some of the other ones certainly weren't. The first point to note here is that Sean Ritchie is a missing persons case. It's not been treated as a murder case by Police Scotland. Sean Ritchie's parents and relatives are convinced that he was murdered and that it should be treated as that, but it's not been. Principal reason being, although they found clothing on the site when they searched it, they did not find any evidence of remains, so it's still officially a missing person case. And the one part of the fake news is that Police Scotland continue to look at all options. Well, they're not looking at all options. They're not looking at the options that the family thinks they should be looking at. And any suggestion by the family that they should look at these options receives a very harsh and negative response. As you'll see here, this next article that's coming up here, this is actually fake news, right? Because this is Sean's mother, Carol Ann Roy, and she was not arrested for wasting police time. This story was broken by the Press and Journal, and they said that she had been charged. Well, she was not charged for wasting police time. When she challenged the Press and Journal journalist about the fake news, the false story here, he said, well, he got it from an impeccable source inside the Crown Office. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service are leaking fake news to the Press and Journal, who are publishing it. Now, why would they be doing that? Why would they be leaking at all? Particularly, why would they be leaking information that's simply not true? So there's clearly an establishment, in some level, an establishment attack on the family, on the relatives of Sean Ritchie, because they will not accept the official story. We don't know. He might be missing. We don't know. And there's nothing more to see here. Because they have enormous amounts of evidence that there are very clear suspects in this case who, for whatever reason, are not being looked at by Police Scotland. And we'll be following up with much detail on that in the next couple of weeks.
David, thank you for that excellent synopsis. The other bit, of course, about this case is that it happened in very close proximity to the area in which the Dohertys found themselves in trouble. And we've also got links to the same policeman. Is that correct?
It's 6 miles away. The search area is 6 miles from where the Dohertys used to live. The day on which Sean Ritchie disappeared was a day that the Dohertys had been told that they would be killed if they were in Scotland. And the policemen attached to the case are almost all of them are mentioned in the Doherty transcript. And the family liaison officer is none other than Gibby Buchan, and Gibby Buchan is has been identified by the Dohertys as the man who presented himself as Sergeant Sam Buchan and misidentified himself to the Dohertys, and was involved in the Doherty investigation most closely as well. So we're dealing with all of the same people, all of the same police officers.
Right. Well, what we're seeing is this failure to act by the police, misconduct in public office, malfeasance in public office, whatever we want to call it. But it's also been backed up by manipulation of the media. Now, these cases are obviously internal to UK, and I'm going to say this is basic crime cases. We've put out a new article on the UK column, which is about wider manipulation of world news by the BBC, entitled BBC Fake News Reality Check. And in particular, this is focusing in again on the BBC's charity Media Action and its links with the European Union. But thank you very much to the person who sent us this document this morning. This is a declassified CIA document, which is talking about the BBC monitoring service back in January 1981. And let's have a look at the sort of thing that's being saying. They're saying the BBC monitoring services cooperated very closely with this is the FBI intelligence service, in providing coverage of Iran throughout the hostage crisis. This is part of the long-standing relationship between FBIS and BBC, under which coverage of a foreign radio broadcast and press information is conducted on a joint basis, both in terms of planning and actual monitoring. So they're working together. We believe it most appropriate to convey to the Chairman appreciation on behalf of the agency for the valuable contribution of the BBC monitoring service. Now, that service is still doing the same job today, paid for by licence payers, totally unaware that they're really running a secret service. And here is another document, and this one is particularly interesting because it's saying, well, we are, of course, depending on the BBC not to attribute monitored material carried in their publications to the FBIS. There is no doubt in my mind that anyone would, especially after last year's flurry with the Manchester Guardian over an FBIS monitored Peking broadcast, which I'm sure the BBC would like to have disclaimed. So the BBC, working with the CIA and this specialist monitoring service from many, many years ago, and they're busy saying, well, of course, you don't want to tell the truth about that because it could cause a furore in the press.
Yep.
So real document released from the CIA, and we're now really getting the measure. We put up this little diagram showing, of course, that we've got the BBC and its charity working with the EU, who's now set up their own propaganda machine, Don't Be Deceived. And they're busy paying Media Action vast amounts of euros, one project alone, 2.4 million euros. But if we put this together, we can bring in GCHQ, also involved. They're very big on LBGT and girls. They're recruiting a lot of girls to be trained up to be spying on the nation state. And we've got the Central Intelligence Agency. Where is the transparency and the accountability? Because I don't see it.
No.
And what can we say is happening on the ground? Well, back to BBC monitoring. This is off the front page of their own website. Kiev's baby steps into world of social media. So here is the BBC boasting about what's going on in Ukraine. Several Ukrainian state institutions have broken the mold by taking cautious steps towards, quote, well-calibrated communication with Ukrainian social media users to promote reforms. Here's the BBC working inside a country to destabilise and get its agenda at work. Among the agents of change are the Ministries of Economy, Finance and Defence, where teams of, quote, reformers use smart visuals and even fictional characters to spread marketing messages to the masses. So we are the herd. And it says here, it was at this crucial moment that YouTube, Facebook and Twitter proved helpful. The Finance Ministry released a series of animated videos explaining what is happening with Privat Bank, which has been watched by 120,000 users. And the message was that the bank was too big to fail and its nationalisation was the only viable option. And that was strengthened by the ministry's Facebook posts with link to Bloomberg and Financial Times articles. David, this is propaganda in your face by the BBC. And of course, if BBC monitoring is in there helping to make these changes, it says change agents, mainstream BBC then reports events as if they've happened autonomously with Ukrainians taking the decisions themselves. This is propaganda, it's fake news, it's subversion, it's outrageous.
It's astounding. It makes the BBC report of World Trade Center 7's collapse 23 minutes before it actually happened seem a little more understandable. But it's astounding to see just how compromised the BBC is with all of these intelligence agencies. We had a small example of that in the Named Person campaign, where we found minutes from a government body months before the No to Named Person campaign had been asked to engage in a debate, saying that this government department was working with the BBC to set this up and organise it. It was a setup to get the right spin. Didn't quite work, but it was a setup to get the right spin, the government spin out over the BBC. It's a propaganda agency. And in answer to your question, Brian, the transparency, where is the transparency and the accountability? Well, we, the people, the families of this country, we have to be transparent to the government. We have to be accountable to the government. It's not working the other way around at the moment.
So this perhaps explains Theresa May's comment that we're not going to be changing countries, nation states to our own image through
military action.
Yes.
No, we're going to go inside.
Send the BBC instead.
Well, the BBC's into all of those eastern states in Europe. It's into Yemen. It's into Somalia. And what are they boasting about? The fact that they can use the BBC to train their own media people to then change the national agenda and produce BBC News.
Is that a form of corruption?
I think it's subversion. I think this is an act of war. If these countries really understood what's happening, the British are using the BBC to get into nation states to destroy them from the inside. That's an act of war.
Yep. Okay. Well, speaking of corruption, then we have the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index 2016 just released. This is covering the perceptions of corruption in the past year to date. Now, they define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. So this it's a pretty damning picture for the world as a whole, because what they're saying is that corruption is getting worse, not better. They're saying that only two countries scored higher than 90 out of 100 in their index. That was Denmark and New Zealand. And 54 of the 176 countries only 54 scored better than 50. Britain came 10th. This is both disappointingly and surprisingly, but of course it is only a survey, so it's perceptions rather than anything else. So Britain came 10th and scored 81 out of 100. So how did they do this? Well, they had 13 different surveys going on over the past 2 years, and they sort of mixed those up and got an idea of what people's perceptions were. But this is only really about perceptions.
So the redder you are, reality. The more corrupt you are.
Yes, in the
so conveniently, the whole of Russia is corrupt, but we've got some very, very corrupt African states in dark red. But Britain is not corrupt at all. This is encouraging, Mike.
And what's interesting is Britain does not seem to be as corrupt as the United States, and certainly not as corrupt as Australia, and absolutely not as corrupt as France, but we're giving France our nuclear weapons.
Yeah. We don't believe the survey at all. We believe that the City of London should be a very intense dark red, and then we'll repaint the rest of the world from there out.
Yes. Okay, David, we'll end on this one. I think education. Press and Journal this morning, hot off the press. You sent this to me literally a few minutes before we came on air. One head teacher for every 5 schools in what's being described as a radical education shake-up.
Yes, and why would they be doing that, Mike? Well, the reason is they cannot recruit head teachers. Now, you would think a well-paid job in the beautiful Highlands of Scotland would actually have people queuing up, but no, because a head teacher is also a named person with all the responsibilities that go with that, and the requirement to spy on all of your children, and no longer be a teacher but be some sort of extension of the state. And they seem to be having great difficulty in getting people to sign up for it. So we're now having one head teacher shared between 5 primary schools. So I would have thought, given the size of the Highlands and the distances involved, most of their time would be spent driving.
Yes. Yeah. And just quickly then, David, on the named person scheme, doesn't privacy mean anything to these people, is the question?
A really good moving blog post here by the No to Named Person campaign. It's written by a mother of a child with cerebral palsy, and describes her unsuccessful fight to maintain some degree of privacy. She says here she wants her information not to be shared, mostly because much of the advice she's received about her child's condition has been very negative and unhelpful. Doctors and medical professions repeatedly told me that the brain condition was so severe our child would never walk or talk or learn. But our little trooper has done all of those things and more, and is now in mainstream school and is one of the brightest pupils in the class. So you see here false medical information, erroneous medical information, and this is one of the problems with the named person scheme, because information is shared, information is not checked. So you get false stories spreading through the whole of the state about you and your family, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And it's coming. If you think I'm over 18, I've escaped it. No, I'm afraid you haven't, because we're now seeing a new scheme which is called Getting It Right for Every Adult. This is we got some information on this during last week, and this is a little article to show just what we know about it so far. It's at an early stage. It seems to be focusing on the elderly, but they changed the title of it from Getting It Right from the Elderly to Getting It Right for Every Adult. So there's probably a reason that name change has been made. It involves single points of contact. It involves the Shinari indicators. All of the things that were so heavily criticised and ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court are being rolled out for adults. So there you have it. No one is listening to law.
Right. So that article on the UK Column website is what's that coming over the hill? And we'll just say, David, as a closing remark, in all the speeches that Theresa May and various other people have made recently, it's about no one being left behind.
Well, yes, and we know what that means. This is the state taking control. This is the state making sure that your liberty is removed, but it's for your own good. So you should be a happy slave.
Yep.
Okay. Well, David, thank you very much for joining us. That brings us to the end of a pretty special week altogether. Things unfolding very quickly. Most of it particularly unpleasant. We are seeing a dictatorship install itself behind a lady who likes tweeds and pearls and blue rinses, but nevertheless, it's still a vicious dictatorship they're trying to put together. We are reporting it. We need your help. If you've read the articles that we've got up on the UK column at the moment, please share those with other people. Please be tweeting out and emailing to alert other people to what we're producing, because that is why we're doing it. So we often see people saying, yes, but what can we do about it? It's expose it. And you can help the UK column at the same time by sharing our output with friends, neighbours and anybody else you can get in communication with. So we need your help. And if you're not a subscriber yet, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. That's it. Thank you for joining us. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.